excited to have you all. Um, Thank you for starting the recording. Today, in this initial meet and greet of the year, we are very, very excited to have these three amazing women with us, Fernanda Rivera, Carla Quesada, and Lucy Kihonge. All of them are working on understanding popular transport in their different contexts, but especially looking at who uses popular transport, how they use it, and what their needs are. And when we're thinking about popular transport reform and we're thinking about what are the adjustments, the improvements, the different strategies for the sector, we need to definitely think about the users. So that's why we're starting our this year's conversation and meet and greet on this topic. We're gonna kick off the conversation with Carla. Carla is the Gender and Inclusive Cities Coordinator in the Center for Urban Sustainability. And she's been doing amazing work in San Jose, Costa Rica, where I am from, so I know her pretty well. And learning a lot about popular transport over here. So I'm gonna send it over to Carla to kick us off. And we're gonna have short presentations, and then we're gonna have a good space for Q&A and discussion with all of you here. The idea is to just have a good conversation. And so write your questions down so we can start having that conversation after the Q&A. So Carla, the floor is yours to kick us off today.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Well, morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. We're going to talk a little bit about the case that we have developed in San Jose, Costa Rica. So I just want to know if you can see my screen right now. Yes, I'm guessing. See?
Yes.
Thank you. So for today, I just wanted to give you a small context before we enter in users' needs and motivations. So one of the first things that I wanted to point out is a little bit about that dimension of the area and the conditions and the characteristics of where we are working with. And we're talking about San Jose, Costa Rica. San Jose is the capital of our country. It's a small country. But in the case of Pavas, that's where we're working. That's one of the districts of this main city that is called San Jose as well. So in certain characteristics that they might be important just to know before we enter the dynamics of popular transportation in the area, is that we're talking about the most populated district of the city of San Jose. We're talking about around 91,000 people that they live there, which we can translate easier to understand the magnitude because this is a country of 5 million people, 5.5 million people. So when we see this data, what we can see is also that nearly one out of the 4 people that live in the canton of San Jose, they live in Pavas, which means that that's a lot of people that are residents in this area. And another important characteristic is that most of these people, they live in low-income neighborhoods, low-income places with low-income characteristics. And that also has to do or the relationship with the way Pavas was urbanized. That began in the 1960s mainly as high-density social housing projects and also informal settlements. So we're talking about a district with a lot of contradictions and inequalities because we also have high-value property as well. So it's a combination of these two, but mostly it's people that live in low-income areas. And just to give you two couple of interesting and important facts to understand informality in this area, is around 11.2% of the people that live there, they live in some sort of informal settlement. We're talking about 12 informal settlements in this area out of the 52 informal settlements that we have in San Jose. So all of this introduction, just to understand that we're talking about an area with high levels of social vulnerability. And as there's a lot of informality, also there's a lot of informal solutions for the needs that are being unmet by the formal sector. So this is a presentation related to popular transportation. I just wanted to point out that it's also an area that has public transportation, that this was also something that was surprising in the first part of our research. We have buses, we have taxis, we have trains. So we do have public transportation services, but they're not meeting the needs of these communities. Just to give you an example, the buses, the routes that they take, They do not enter high-density areas, so people don't have options of how to enter those areas. Taxis are very expensive, so people don't actually use them. And trains, they have a specific schedule that they're related to the productive sector. So it's mainly in the mornings, in the afternoon. So they underserve certain periods of time. So we just wanted to point out that when we're talking about popular transportation in Pavas, what we're seeing is that it's a type of transportation that provides two types of mobility as well, that are very important. The intra-district one, that it's the one that helps connect neighborhoods within Pavas, and also the inter-district mobility, that is the one that is connecting Pavas to another important city, that it's San Jose itself. So this has a rise as an option, as a very important option, even though it's an illegal operation, because in Costa Rican political framework, or law framework, regulatory framework, the law says that it's operating outside the law. All of that will be important as we talk about users' needs and motivations, because we started talking to users, and one thing that we saw is that even though we have public transportation, as I already mentioned, there are certain motives or certain things that make popular transportation an option that is more attractive to them. For example, speed. So speed, it was related for them to the fact that they can reach certain points in a quicker way, because public transportation right now, it doesn't, that schedules within the works, it doesn't move as fast as people need to move. They also have as a second option the lack of mobility options. They consider that even when they have options, they are not enough for the amount of needs and the amount of dynamics that they do in their communities and outside their communities. And the third most value motive was frequency, because one thing that we saw during the operation of the popular transportation is that it replicates public transportation. It uses the same infrastructure. It has similar rates. They have similar roles and dynamics, but it's more frequent. So it also creates familiarity, but it helps in the fact that it's more frequent and more accessible for people to get there. So enter to user needs. For me, this is the core of the presentation. I will just ask Andrea whenever I'm just above my time to let me know. But talking a little bit about the user needs, I think there's two main ones that we saw during our research. There was access and connectivity, especially when we're talking about the intra-district connectivity, because as I already mentioned, the public transportation doesn't connect specific neighborhoods. And this is also important because it creates access to stigmatized neighborhoods. So there are certain areas of Pavas, because it's a community that has a lot of different dynamics. There are certain neighborhoods that are very dangerous. So public transportation do not offer options of mobility over there. And also talking about Uber and Didi, that those are not as well illegal in Costa Rica, they also don't serve this area. So popular transportation is also creating access to stigmatized neighborhoods where a lot of people with different conditions, also vulnerable populations, they live there, which is also very important for people. And it also creates connectivity to key care facilities, because one thing that you can see when you go to Pavas is that they are located in supermarkets, markets as well, pharmacy, clinics, etc. And it creates first and last mile connections. So it's also very important for the connectivity in the trips that people are taking, the users are making. And this is also one important thing that I'm going to talk a little bit about, a study that we're currently working on, and it's the care mobility. This is one of the essential things that we notice in our study, that most of the users of the popular transportation in Pava's case, they're mainly women. And they're women that they're moving around with kids, with elderly people, with people with disabilities. So popular transportation also serves people in their everyday life tasks, connectivity with this care facility that I already mentioned, but also with work, with their families, with the kindergartens, schools, etc. So that's also very important when we're talking about the reason why it works so well in Pavas. And also it's considered to be very accessible. I mean, it's in two ways. It's accessible because it's easier to put bags inside a car, and it's easy to move around with big items such as wheelchairs or carriages and other items. but it's also easy to access because it's so intrinsic to the dynamic of the community that most of people, they know someone that provides these services. It's a neighbor, it's someone that they have a phone number, they know where they are, and there's always someone providing a service. So that's also one of the reasons in care mobility, that is a very delicate type of mobility, it's so important. No? So I just wanted to point out these like 4 key ideas. And it's that even though it's so important for the community, and it provides services that are so essential, there's also safety related issues. No? One of them related to the fact that as it is considered illegal in the Costa Rican context, there's a lot of persecution to the operators, which creates also risk for the users, because as they are in the vehicles, when there's police raids and there's persecutions, they also suffer from high stress and a lot of risky situations revolving this. And I just wanted to point out that, as I already mentioned, familiarity, that is the second thing that we have over here. I already mentioned the relationship that are being created between providers and the users. There's also relationships of care that they're created between them. No? Users are concerned about the operators' conditions, work conditions, because they want dignity for them and they want safety for them. And also, they also want dignity and safety for them as users. So there's a care relationship related to the whole operation. And one thing that you might think, considering that we're talking about low income communities where money is an issue, it's that it's very interesting that even though the public transportation is a lot expensive than the public transportation, it is considered more desirable because it's faster, which also works for the dynamics of these people. And if they need to get home faster, they work long schedules, they need to move, they have care responsibilities as well. So speed becomes the main reason to choose these, even though they're paying more than public transportation. One other thing that I just wanted to point out is that after we published the first study, we started working in the second part of our article that is mostly related to operations needs. And one thing that was pointed out is that security issues related to territory disputes along the people that are providing the service, they have risen in the last year, in the last part of the last year. That was a big issue for our research. And of course, it's a gigantic issue for the community. That's our main concern. But that these disputes around territory also affects users as well, because they were in the middle of very dangerous situations related to who provides the service and where is it provided. No, so that's also one interesting thing, because this made, after a couple of conversations with operators, this whole dispute aspect of territory made users go back to public transportation because they felt safer in the public transportation, which is something that we can see it also affects, it has an impact in the community and the mobility of the community as well, because the issues related to public transportation, they haven't been fixed. So they just decided to go back to what they know, even though it's slower, it's not in great conditions, it's not accessible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just to finish, because I think I'm about to go past my time, I just wanted to point out that right now we're working in this specific case that is related to a clinic, a medicine center that is called La Clínica de Pavas. And we have been working around operators' needs, but there are also users' needs have been pointed out by operators. And in this specific case, I think it's very, very interesting because the operators, they have been aware of the fact that most of the people that are serving, 99%, I would say, there are people that they are sick in some ways or they need medicine attention. You know, people go to this clinic for a specific reason. And one of the things that they have done is that they have switched the way they've been operating to do some care mobility, but for people that require medical assistance. So the way that they're changing the way they operate is that they are allowing people to enter with wheelchairs, or that they have these small seats that are needed to move kids. And this is very interesting because the user's needs in this specific context are to be taken care of. No? So we're talking about elderly women, people that are pregnant, people with kids, people with disabilities of different ways. And in this specific case, that I cannot tell you I cannot tell you a lot more of what we're talking right now because it's an undergoing research. What we have seen, it's also how this type of popular transportation adapts as well to care mobility in a wider aspect of care mobility as we understand it. No, in this case, we're talking about care mobility related to medical issues. So that's a little bit of what I wanted to share, and I think I will leave it like this, and later we can talk a little bit more if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carla. Let me
Welcome.
just, yeah. Thank you so much, Carla. And I think traditionally there's been a lot of assumptions around popular transport, and this type of research updates us and kind of contests some of those assumptions. For example, that popular transport is only there when there is no public transport services. But in this case, no, it coexists with formal public transport services because it's serving specific needs and a gap in mobility needs of people. The element of intra-district connectivity and the elements of trust and familiarity contest the idea that usually when there is a public transport route or if we build a BRT, then people will use that, but usually that only connects a certain corridor, but within the district you also need certain trips, right? And also the element of trust and familiarity, especially when we're thinking of families, elderly people, caregivers. There is a very important component of if I'm feeling not feeling well, if I need to go to the doctor, it's much better to go with someone I trust and know that they will take care of me. So those are things that I think when we are aiming towards strategies to work with the sector, understanding those needs and those things that people value and how even the system itself is adjusting to satisfy those needs is really, really important to consider. Carla, you raised your hand. Was there something
Yeah.
else you wanted to comment?
Yes, it's a short thing. Just as you were mentioning certain things, I just thought that it's very interesting. We heard once when we were talking to one of the users that they considered public transportation as part of the history of Pavas as a community. So it's because, as you were mentioning, there's an understanding or perspective sometimes the public transportation is an option that people use when there's a lack of other options. In this case, there's an understanding that it's a service that it's as familiar and as part of the community that it's not something that they have at the well, it's the only option. It's actually something that is like we've been working in this for a long time and we know how it works, and they know how to provide a service that it's community based
Of
and
course.
community fixed to work for the community that they understand and they created together. So I think
Yeah.
in Pavas, it's a very interesting case of not the only option or the last option. It's an option that it's already part of the community identity.
Yeah. And I think that it's also something that in the cases where the authorities attempt to just replace that by something else, it's something that leaves a big gap of that familiarity, of that knowing your driver, about being able to ask for something flexible in the service. That is lost when you just substitute it by something else, which involves a completely different company or something like that. So thanks so much for highlighting those elements. I think with that final mention of care mobility and the importance of trust and the types of trips that are being done on popular transport, I'll segue into Fernanda. Fernanda, I'll let you introduce yourself, but I just wanted to mention Fernanda is one of the newest members of our GNPT team. She is now our network building and advocacy lead, and she's been doing amazing work in Mexico City for a long time, working with the popular transport sector. So it's amazing to have you here, Fernanda, talking about your experience. So
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, everyone. I'm Fernanda Rivera. I worked 12 years for Mexico City's government, and then I went to study a master's at London at UCL, and now I'm proudly part of the MPT. And I love to work with popular transportation because the last 3 years of my professional experience as a public official in Mexico City was to work with all the popular transport sector of microbuses and cycle taxis and moto taxis to try to have a just transition in this formalization process that we had. So that's why I chose to do my dissertation at UCL about mobilizing care because gender and popular transport are two of my favorite topics, and I had the chance to study and research about it. So I'm going to tell you about the dissertation that I made for UCL and all the information that I had. So let me introduce you. Just a little bit of context. We have to recognize that we live in unequal cities, that most of our contexts are really, really unequal on the accessibility that we have. This is Mexico City, on unequal transport opportunities or types of transport that we have. And also we have to recognize that there are inequalities between how men and women move around the cities on a daily basis. I decided to do this research because I recognize that transport is essential to access activities, but also it can propagate unfair distribution of accessibility and inequalities within our context. And that it's important to reflect the user's identities, gender, class, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, age, or any mental or physical ability that are taken into account into this difference. So taking this into consideration, I always have this idea that first, transport is never neutral, and we have to have this on our mind whenever we try to plan, implement, or research. Second, transport can be gender violent. And I think that in our context, at least in Latin America, but I'm sure that all around the world, we have all suffered harassment on public transport and public space. It has been a male-dominated sector, so also planning and implementation has this behind. And that's why I chose to make my dissertation about mobilizing care and how we can study with a framework that is a transport-related social exclusion and the role of popular transport in Mexico City. So just a little bit of context of one of my favorite city in the world, that is Mexico City. It's the fifth largest metropolitan area. We have 22 million inhabitants in Greater Mexico City and 9.2 million inhabitants in what you see in this map. It's a large metropolis, and we move a lot of people on a daily basis. Greater Mexico City has 34 million daily trips. Just in Mexico City, on a daily basis, we have 19 million trips. And I always say that we're lucky enough because 8 out of 10 trips are made by walking, cycling, or public transportation. So we don't have this a challenge of getting rid of people using the car. We have a lot of cars, like 5 million, but what we need to focus is how we improve the experience of using public transportation in Mexico City. Only 20% of our trips are in motorized vehicles. But what is really interesting is that this microbus, that it's our concesional transport or popular transport in Mexico City, moves 7 million daily trips in the city, more than the subway. We have 12 subway lines in Mexico City that move around 4.5 million trips, but microbuses and popular transport in these minibuses move around 7 million daily trips, which makes them like the veins of the mobility sector in Mexico City. This is our public transportation network. Mexico City has 12 subway lines, 7 BRT, 3 cable cars, trolley buses, light trains. All this is planned, operated, and subsidized by the public sector in Mexico City's government, the Ministry of Mobility, and it's really, really subsidized. Actually, there's a perspective of public transportation in Mexico City that it's a social policy, no, that you have to subsidize it, so average 70%. But we also have these private operated buses that are the microbuses or el transporte concesionado, and the cycle taxis and moto taxis, and a large sector of trips that are made by popular transportation. I chose to do my dissertation about Xochimilco. Xochimilco is in the south part of Mexico City. Mexico City is divided in 16 boroughs. This is one of the 16 boroughs that we have. It's in the southern part. Maybe you don't know, but Mexico City, only 40% of the city is urban land and 60% of the city is conservation land. So we have forests, wetlands, a lot. Well, it was built over a lake, so maybe the history is still there. And Xochimilco is this historical place that has It still has canals, a lot of community, and it has almost 450,000 inhabitants that live in Xochimilco on a daily basis. Why I chose it? Because it's a peripheral territory, so it can teach us quite a lot about different contexts that are similar in Mexico City. Of course, as every peripheral context in our cities, it has unequal infrastructure and a steep topography. Popular transport is part of the daily life of Xochimilco, history and mobility, and I think that it can represent a lot of Global South. My research question was, how do women experience transport-related social exclusion? And what are the gaps that occur in between women's need, operators' practices, and the institutional formalization responses? Because there's a gap in between these three different multi-layer scale. Just to explain you a little bit of the framework that I use, it's a transport-related social exclusion, that it explains that a lot of people or households, in this case was women, but it can apply to everybody. It's how we do not attend different activities regarding job, leisure, education, related to the transport opportunities or accessibility that you have. There are 7 different dimensions that this framework studies. So the first one is physical exclusion. Imagine that the sidewalks are not enough size, so you cannot walk in them. They are not accessible. Second, geographical exclusion. You live really further away, that the area where you live is excluding you from going to different activities. Third, exclusion from facilities. There are no hospitals, no schools, no cultural centers around where you live, so you don't attend those types of activities because they're really far away. Four, economic exclusion. It's really expensive for you to do the trip, so you don't do it. 5, time-based exclusion. It takes a lot of time waiting or making the different connections in within transports to do the activity. So again, you don't do it. 6, I think that all women, we have this one, it's fear-based exclusion. You don't do that trip because you're afraid of doing the walking or the cycling or using the public transportation. And space exclusion, that is more related to these gated communities or places where you don't feel welcome. I use this framework and I decided to analyze the different scales of how people move. The first one was understand women needs. How do they move around? Why do they choose how they move around? Or why did they don't move in their context? This is also relevant. Second, understand how the operation of popular transportation works in Xochimilco. And third, I used to be the government official, but understand the public policy and the perspective of formalization. I've made this participatory workshop, feminist methodologies based on Collective Punseis, where I decided to listen 25 women during 2 days. The average age was 39 years old. I had from 18 to 72. These, like you can see, they told me how they move around. So most of them, they walk. We know that women, they walk the most, but also the microbus, that it's the middle line, it's the second thing they use the most. Taxis, ciclo-taxis, and I'll start telling you a little bit more about, but this is how the methodology work. We listened to each other. They told me their experiences, their itineraries, the networks they use on their community, how they move around, what they think, what is good and bad of each different mode of transport. So it was like 3 hours during 2 days of listening these users' experiences that, as a former public official, we tend to make invisible and we don't listen to the user experience and we think that we're giving what they need. But in the end, you're going to see it, long story short, how it works. I gave them all these formats, so they told me what they like the most about walking, what they like the least about walking. For example, in this case, they told me I feel relaxed and I feel free when I walk, but also I feel unsafe when I walk. What I like about microbuses is that they stop everywhere. What I don't like, the times that they operate. So I start having all these insights of the user's experiences. Second, I made semi-structured interviews with popular transport operators, with government officials. In the case of the operators, I try to ask them about the mobility patterns, how they move around with the women, the users, the operation strategies, which type of users they move. And even though they were not aware that they're moving more women, In the case of cycle taxis, they ended up telling me like, okay, yes, I move a lot of women. I pick them up in their house. We go to the school, then we go to the market. She asked me to wait for her because she wants to buy the meat, the vegetables, or whatever they want to do. And I was like, okay, this is chain trips and care-related mobility. Maybe he's not aware of this, but they're trying to improve and this type of mobility. Then I also made a lot of interviews with former public officials, not myself, but a lot of people around. Then I made inside observations, and all the pictures that I'm sharing are pictures that I took those days, no? So it was super obvious that women are the most, the highly users of public transportation, how they carry bags, they go with kids, and you see it around. So the findings, the first thing that it's not a surprise, even though it's sad, that women, we experience all the different 7 exclusions that I share with you: physical, geographical, time-based, economic-based, fear-based, space. So we have all of them. Surprise for all of us, not. Popular transport is essential and irreplaceable, at least in Xochimilco, but now I see that in Pavas too, and I'm sure that in many different contexts. Economic and time poverty are structural barriers for women. Fear shapes how, when, and where we move and how we travel around. Physical exclusion, it's a burden for care-related trips. And there's geographical exclusion, and there's the basis of the dependence of popular transport. Just to tell you a little bit of it, the first one is how we experience interdependent forms of exclusion. We have high fares that push women to wait the slower modes that might be cheaper. So that implies that they have to wait a little bit longer. They feel unsafe by walking, and there's greater time poverty. So here we can see that the time that women had, the money that women have, the budget, are not separated. They're always together, and I saw them this in their experiences. Second, popular transportation is essential for women's daily life. Why? For 3 main reasons is what they told me. First, the coverage. Compared to formal modes, even though there's formal transport in Xochimilco, the coverage of popular transportation is wider, so they feel that they can get connected to these narrow streets. The frequency and the availability, it's really important, just as Carla presented, it's the same case. And the flexibility. Flexibility was something that they keep mentioning. They stop everywhere. When you are carrying bags or carrying the kids, having these flexible stops are really useful for women. Dropping passengers close to their home, and adapting to this multi-stop trip change associated with care activities. So these are the 3 reasons. Again, a major barrier is still the economic and time related. Women, for example, they feel like the cycle taxis are more expensive. So even though they would love to use them because they save a lot of time, it also makes them pay a little bit more money. They only use taxis or ride hailing when they are really on a rush or they have an emergency due to the cost. And again, time poverty is really hard for women because the long waiting times are things that they have to pay. They don't pay with money, they pay by waiting 40, 45 minutes, 1 hour for the bus that they want to take. Again, fear and insecurity. They have fear of walking at night. They have low trust in taxis and ride hailing because they don't feel safe when they're riding alone or with their kids. They have, again, as we all have, concerns about harassment, assaults, or accidents. But it's important how they feel a little bit closer to this popular transport, because I interviewed these popular transport operators that now they have become into a private bus company that it's called Taxomil. They were microbus drivers that converted into this formalized bus company. And what they started doing is having these like informal practice that is not regulated, that they have flexible stops at night for women. So they drop off women closer to where they live, even though it's not a formal stop. This is not something that was asked by the government. It's something that the bus company that used to be a microbus started implementing because they realized that that was a need, at least at night when people feel unsafer. There's again physical exclusion. You can see here the side of the sidewalks, the narrow streets, and the flexibility. This is also important, that is usually lost during the formalization process. I'm going to show you some maps because here is like the text of how popular transport, it's not it's covering a wider area, at least in Xochimilco. So look at this map. This is the Xochimilco map of the organized structured transport. We have the red one is our BRT, and the blue one is our light train. That are the only two modes of transport that go to Xochimilco. The next map, it's when you put all the different routes of microbuses, and of course, here is not the ciclo taxis, but you can see how the coverage changes, no? If we only had this structured transport in Xochimilco, people will be really excluded. But when you see all the different routes of microbuses, buses, and transporte concesionado in this area, they go where the city finished, that is here, Milpa Alta. Now it's a new bus company, that's why it's purple, but the gray ones are still microbuses in Xochimilco, Tláhuac, and the southern part of the city. And what also Carla shared, but it also appeared, it's how relevant is the support networks for women. It works as a social infrastructure. I made them ask, fill in this format, that in the middle they had to put their name, and they had to put all the different facilities, people that they rely on to have freedom on their mobility. It's impressive how they rely on the markets, on their sisters, on their transport to be able to do all these different activities. Also, they mentioned that operators are part of the community, that this accessibility depends quite a lot on the relationships, more than the physical infrastructure that the community has, and that losing trust is losing accessibility also for them. So I changed this, the last dimension of the framework, that it was called space social exclusion, into trust, how trust can reduce the social exclusion of women when moving around. So just a quick summary. In the different 7 dimensions that I study, I saw how popular transport, for example, in the case of physical exclusion, is really relevant for the door-to-door access, reducing the walking barriers. In the case of geographical exclusion, for example, it reaches area that is not covered by the formal systems. When you analyze the different economic exclusions, they rely on the low microbuses fares and the flexible options to help them reduce their costs. Time-based exclusion, of course, a high coverage and frequency of the services during peak hours help them to shorten distance. The fear-based exclusion, this was the case of how the operators started implementing these flexible stops. And in the case of space exclusion, also how this trust and familiarity with the drivers, it's really important to reduce women's transport-related social exclusion. So just as a closing remarks, we have to recognize that popular transport in this case, it's an enabler of coverage, flexibility, trust, and responsiveness, even though it might be still a barrier on the fares, the unstable conditions, or some insecurity conditions that they still feel. There's a misalignment across what women want and how they move. We need flexible mobility, that it's safe, that it's affordable, that it's predictable, and that it's close and trust, and that we can trust in it. What we receive is a fragmented service, fares that are misaligned, we have it still insecurity, poor infrastructure, and policies that overlook the central role of care in mobility. How we compensate it? With alternative routes, we change our schedules, we rely on community networks, or the worst case is that we give up a lot of trips, so we're excluded as women when we don't receive this type of mobility. So long story short, I realized that the needs of women that are usually flexibility, safety, affordability, and trust are trying to be covered by the operation of popular transport by having these adaptations, but still there's a lack of support. And the public policy that comes from the government, that is just the formalization, there's still a deep mismatch in between the planning imaginaries and what are the daily life requirements of women. This is like hitting me myself, but I find out this because I was in charge of all these projects. And now I also realize from this critical perspective how relevant it is to engage with users and the care practice and still understand, even though that we made a great effort to work with the transport operators to make this just transition of microbuses towards a bus company, there's still a lack of listening to the users. So what we can do, and this is a reflection a positive one. First, still recognize and eradicate any type of gender violence that we can suffer as women in the public transport. Second, attend and prioritize women travel patterns. Here are some ideas of how, having this feminist perspective, integrate care into planning, design, and implementation, having disaggregated data. For example, all the studies of these new bus companies, of the microbuses, drop-on and drop-offs, they were disaggregated. At least they gave us more idea of where women drop off, where women get on the bus. Have safety audits of the bus stops, for example, where they should be located. Improve the frequency. So frequency should be a priority, even though frequency might not be a priority in off-peak hours because it's more expensive to have more buses when there are less number of passengers. But again, we need to improve frequency. The cable car is a good example because it has the same frequency all day long. How it will have the same time, the waiting times during off-peak hours than during peak hours. So more women are using the cable car, at least in Mexico City. Understand the transport dynamics of popular transportation. Plan with user and with operators to understand how we can have this planning. And transformation of popular transport should consider flexibility, that it's a relevant characteristic of these popular transportations. These are the new buses that are replacing the microbuses in Mexico City, but there should not be invisible flexibility on their usage. We still have more women in the transport sector. And in conclusion, we have to take into the basis that when care stops, the world stops. So care is the basis of our society. That we need to have this planning with care in mind. It's key because we will start prioritizing flexibility, coverage, and attending these times, areas, or users that are not being attended by the formal public transportation. Of course, we need a redistribution of care-related activities. It's not a women's thing. Care, it's even a government thing. So we can think how we redistribute all these activities. And last but not least, I believe that reducing social exclusion of women and rethinking the role of popular transport is social justice. And if we plan cities for girls and women, we can make a better city for everyone. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fernanda. I think this combination of Costa Rica and Mexico is giving us some trends and insights that, as Ruben was saying in the chat, there's so much to learn from each other, and that's precisely the spirit of these types of spaces, that we exchange knowledge. And I think there's really, really interesting insights there in terms of the need for flexibility and how the exchange of time versus costs also is really important in users deciding which mode to take, right? So that is something that we need to take into consideration in planning. And something that Fernanda mentioned, I think, is really, really essential. Usually the authorities tend to work more or focus more on working with the operators for reform, for regulation, for planning. But if the users are not taken into consideration, we might be missing a lot of things. So I'm gonna pass it over to Lucy now. Lucy is from Flone Initiative, which is a wonderful organization based in Kenya. They've been doing a lot of work in the popular transport sector, but with a gender perspective. And here we're gonna listen about the house. What can we do to start incorporating these genders perspective and these understandings about the user needs in the way that we plan and design and improve services in the popular transport sector? So Lucy, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and let.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you everybody who is joining us. It's already evening in Nairobi, so good evening, everybody. My name is Lucy Kihonge. I work at Flone Initiative and I support in the space of gender and disability inclusion in public transport. I'm a gender and human rights expert, and so happy to be here and for this learning session, and happy to see everybody on board. So just to set the pace for my presentation, I just want to give just 1 minute to introduce Flone Initiative. And we are a women-led organization that's based in Nairobi, Kenya. This year we are celebrating our 13th anniversary, and we mainly focus on 4 key main priorities. First of all, our work is informed by research and knowledge generation because we believe in implementing interventions that are evidence-based. We also focus on inclusive and functional public transport system, just looking at how does public transport influence the vulnerable users and how best can we engage different stakeholders to make it more safer, inclusive, and accessible. We also focus on policy engagement and advocacy. And in this regard, we work closely with government agencies. Here in Kenya, we have two levels. We have the national government and the county government, providing technical support in developing policies, codes of conduct, and generally providing support to gender and inclusivity. And we also focus on issues of health and environmental sustainability. And as you all know, right now, everybody is talking about just transition, e-mobility, clean energy. So we're also trying to focus on how women and persons with disabilities can be included in that space. And our vision, basically, it's a just public mobility system. So in around 2020 thereabout, we were able to develop a toolkit. And this toolkit, it's called the Gender Sensitive Minibus Service and Transport Infrastructure for African City. So this is a tool that can be used by cities and especially African cities to ensure that they are more gender inclusive in operations, management, just to ensure that women, persons with disabilities, children, and older person needs and priorities are mainstream within the public transport ecosystem. So the foundations of this toolkit was based on two assessments. So the first assessment was the gender equity assessment. And this assessment basically was looking at gender considerations for women public transport workers. And then the other assessment was looking at mobility of care. And just to build on what Carla and Fernanda were talking about, the travel patterns of women, the trip chaining, what are the needs of the women, right? So after that, that lays the foundation of the toolkit, and these were the main recommendations from the first assessment of gender equity. And from the findings, the assessment identified that 76% of female operators, that's women drivers and conductors, have actually experienced or witnessed sexual gender-based violence in public transport, and majorly in the main city of Kenya, which is Nairobi. And diving deeper and trying to see where were these incidences happening. So it was identified that majority of these incidences happen at the major bus parks, inside the public transport vehicles. Here we majorly call them matatus. And every day, women workers would experience harassment. And also looking at how the women reacted when they were harassed, you can see about 32%, a majority of them kept silence. And we should be able to know why they did not report. And a significant percentage of about 21%, they fought back physically. And you can see the lowest percentage at 2% reported to the union. So you can see the dynamics here, and this shows how women survivors or victims of harassment within the transport industry do not report. So looking at the other assessment, which is the mobility of care, the question mainly we're asking ourselves, why and how do women travel? And I believe this has been deeply discussed by colleagues Carla and Fernanda. And popping out clearly, you can see most of the women were traveling because they were accompanying either a child, an adult to school, some were going to work, some were going to shopping, and even a typical woman. Even if you're going to work, there is something else that you do along the way. Maybe first of all, drop your child to school, and then after that, proceed to work. In the evening, you have to pass by the market, get some groceries from there, pick your child, go back home, do some shopping around your home. So there's a lot that happens around women movement on daily basis. And of course, further, we wanted to establish what was the main mode of transport preferred by the women. And at 83%, you can see they preferred matatu, and these are the minibuses, the 14-seaters. And the others actually at 5% preferred taxi. And you know what comes with a taxi, it's an additional cost. And the lowest percentage actually preferred boda boda. Boda boda, the motorcycle, the two-wheelers. We also wanted to identify why they preferred matatu, and one of the things they said was because it's more safer. Number two, comfort. We also have it's more reliable, accessible, and convenience. Just to when we're looking at that, we also wanted to know what are the experiences of women commuters. And shockingly, we had about 88% of the women commuters having witnessed or experienced sexual gender-based violence while using public transport within Nairobi. So these are not just statistics, these are women, and you know the ripple effect that such an experience can have. First of all, limited access to opportunities. Secondly, women have to change their travel patterns. Thirdly, they have to choose what to wear. Number four, they have to choose when to travel. So there are a lot of dynamics when it comes to harassment and how it affects women generally. So I mentioned earlier, only 2% of the women reported these incidents. And the question you're asking ourselves, why are women not reporting? And first of all, they said it's because of stigma associated with reporting, victim blaming, and also lack of training among the law enforcers on how to support survivors of sexual gender-based violence. And the other thing is lack of trust, because they say they lacked trust in the criminal justice system, whereby a perpetrator, for example, is arrested and they are never convicted. And the next day they find them on the road, posing a more threat to these women, safety and security issues to these women. And the third thing is cost implication associated with the process of seeking justice. And again, bearing in mind that the public transport in Kenya is majorly informal. And what that means is that the public transport companies lack formal channels of reporting. They lack formal pathways to refer the survivors, and this actually increases the vulnerability, causes more harm to the women, and at the end of the day, they choose not to report. And for those who reported, as you can see on your screen, we had 54 saying that no action was taken, and then 33% saying the perpetrator was actually fired. And the majority of them actually said no action was taken. And this actually discourages the women and also other survivors from reporting such incidents. So the findings from those two assessments led to now the development of this toolkit. And these are basically some of the recommendations that are contained in the toolkit. I will be able to share the link where you can access it. So one of the recommendations was to develop customer feedback tools that align with the organization's customer service charter. And you realize in public transport in Kenya, and especially most African cities, being informal, there are no channels where commuters, and especially women and other vulnerable commuters like the older persons, can channel feedback for them to improve their services. So one of the recommendations is the customer service charter. The other component is on the policies to address sexual gender-based violence within the public transport system. You also have the other component that looks at modification of the vehicles to actually accommodate persons with disabilities, older persons, and other people with limited mobility. And lastly, it also talks about adoption of family-friendly human resource policies within the public transport companies, and I should be able to talk about this later in detail. So when it comes to customer service charter, so the key recommendation were that the public transport company, if they have a customer service charter, they review and ensure that they include women they include persons with disabilities, they include a children perspective, while they are reviewing and improving the customer service charters. And the other thing that the toolkit recommends is the display of the customer service charter inside the matatus, such that everybody can be able to see them and know the kind of service that that public transport company offers or ought to provide. So for effective implementation, the toolkit further recommends conceptualization of the reporting tools. For example, you find in Kenya, most of the operators do not have smartphone, so you cannot have the toolkit online. So the other proposal was that maybe adopt an SMS where people can provide feedback. And then number two is training operators on feedback gathering. It's one thing having a toolkit for reporting, and it's another thing implementing it and showing people, having qualified people to teach people on how to report or to provide feedback on the kind of customer service they are receiving. Lastly, is continuous improvement. And this is based on the fact that, and you can bear me witness, all of you, sometimes people come up with tools, they come up with policies, they come up with guidelines, but they are outdated. They are not updated to address the current issues. So the toolkit further emphasizes on importance of being up to date and ensuring that current issues are included, and everybody, as the reviews, as the improvements are happening, are included in the whole process. The other component that's contained in the toolkit is adoption of standardized sexual harassment policies. And I've just said 73% of women workers and 88% of women commuters being survivors of sexual gender-based violence. And that means that at the end of the day, public transport in Kenya, and especially in Nairobi, is not as safe as it should be for women who want to use or work there. So one of the component in the toolkit is the creation of zero tolerance sexual harassment policies by the public transport companies, and also ensure that the policies are reviewed and signed during orientation or onboarding of new employees. And this is something that we realize that it hasn't been happening. And sometimes when employees are being onboarded, they're just given a document. They don't read it, they just sign on the last page. So the toolkit emphasizes on the need to take them through, ensure that they understand before they sign. The other and the last recommendation by the toolkit is organizing mandatory biannual sexual harassment trainings. You realize due to normalization of harassment within the public transport sector, one of the things that happens is that people eventually forget. And again, in the transport industry, there is high turnover rate, being informal, where you don't have to sign any formal contract. So there is that emphasis that each public transport company needs to ensure that they train their employees each and every time, at least 2 times per year, to just keep the information fresh, to keep them updated, and to ensure that for the new people who have been onboarded, they are also aware of zero tolerance to sexual harassment policies. The other component is on matatu modification, and this actually emphasizes on how best do we accommodate, do we provide reasonable accommodations, accommodation to persons with disabilities, and especially considering that women with disabilities are more vulnerable compared to women without disability, or of course, more vulnerable than persons without disabilities. So one of the recommendations is that there need to be provision of better lighting inside vehicles and other stages. And when I was starting this conversation, I said most of the harassment incidents usually happens inside the vehicles at the bus parks, and the main perpetrators are the public transport operators. But this doesn't mean that lighting on its own can guarantee safety and security of the women, right? But again, poorly lit areas are found to be prone to, women are more exposed to harassment, are more exposed to safety and security issues. And then the other thing is stop announcement inside the matatus. And this actually helps persons, especially those who have limited mobility or have, for example, hearing impairment, they are able to hear the announcement when it's being made, and this actually improves the customer experience. Also, there's a fully transparent windows, and right now there's a trend in Kenya, and started sometimes back, where vehicles have this amazing graffiti, tinted black, loud music. We have these blinking lights, and then there's so very loud music, such that even if there is any incident within that matatu, nobody can be able to detect, nobody can be able to suspect. So the toolkit further recommends provision of transparent windows in the vehicles. And there's also installation of CCTV cameras, and this again is to collect data on whatever is happening inside the matatus, at the bus parks, and along the commute. And lastly, we have regular vehicle maintenance. The last component is on gender responsive human resource policies, and this looks at employment. Again, we believe in there's nothing for you without you. So again, employment of women, we believe by having more women working in the transport industry, they are able to advocate for more safer spaces. They are able to advocate for more inclusive policies that are women-centered, that can support women commuters, that can support persons with disabilities. And currently, though it's at the formalized entities in Kenya, we have the two-third gender rule, where there is a requirement that for any company, two-third or a third should be either gender. And then, of course, introduction of career and personal development programs. And this looks at, of course, empowering women to get into the industry, to be attracted, to be retained, and to be advanced. And also looking at issues of how can we work closely with public transport operators, and especially men who are the main perpetrators. I'm not saying they are the only perpetrators, I'm saying they are the main perpetrators, to ensure that public transport is more safer, it's more inclusive, it's more accessible for the vulnerable users. And lastly, also providing contract that stipulate the terms of employment, wages, and career for promotion and dismissal of any staff member who is found violating either the SGBV policy, the customer service charter, or even any other HR policies within the public transport companies. Lastly, I want to highlight some of the milestones that the toolkit has been able to go through. So first of all, we've seen public transport companies develop internal policies to address sexual gender-based violence, and actually even coming up with incidents occurrence books to just strengthen how they report, how they document incidents, how they follow up, how they refer survivors, so just to ensure that the public transport system is more safer for its users. And there are also priority seating campaigns, and just recently we conducted campaign with a public transport company, just trying to emphasize on need of providing priority seatings for persons with disabilities, and make their commute more effective, more efficient. And we also have training of operators on inclusivity. Again, there is that component. Why we have poor customer service, why we have sexual violence, it's because some of these operators, when they go to driving school or they go for training, they are not trained on either how to support persons with disabilities, how to support women commuters, how to support children. So that's another component that's well brought out by the toolkit, and some of the company are actually implementing this recommendation. And there's also fair charts well displayed. And again, I've talked about the industry being informal, and colleagues here, Carla and Fernanda, have been talking about affordability, transparency. So the fair charts, within Nairobi right now, most of the vehicles do have fare chart inside, such that you are not overcharged. During off-peak and peak, the fare is mostly standardized. And lastly, we have reporting channels with the public transport circles, where they've started coming up with, for example, phone numbers where survivors can complain. they have dedicated committees that are able to address complaints from commuters, and this has really helped in one way or another. So I would like to stop at that, and I should be able to share the toolkit with you in the chat so that you can get more information or maybe implement it in your city. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And I think this resource is really valuable to, if someone today was hearing about these things for the first time, now it's really useful to go look at the toolkit and see which things you can start with. I'm seeing some questions in the chat. I think there's a couple of things you mentioned that even Carla and Fernanda could comment on. I see Carla has her hand up, so this is the time for everyone to just exchange questions and comments. We're gonna do, we usually close at in 20 minutes. I can't do with all the different time zones, but right before closing, what we're gonna have Jackie do some commenting and closing of the session. Jackie is the director of the PRISM network, and which is supported by the Volvo Research and Education Foundations, which makes all of these spaces possible. So we're gonna have Jackie do a closing there, but for now we'll provide some space. Carla and Fernanda, if you want to do some comments, or people who are in the audience can also raise their hands if you want to ask or comment something. So Carla, go ahead.
Okay, so I just wanted to add something related to Lucy's presentation, and also like it talks to all of our presentations, no? Because also there's a question by Jackie that it's like, how can we work with these systems to improve conditions, even in illegal contexts like Costa Rica? No, I was thinking about Lucy's toolkit, and I was thinking about this aspect of increasing women as operators and how it relates to certain improvements that we have seen, ¿verdad? Like, for example, in this last case that I was talking about, the Pavas Clinic, and that we already know that women's working in public transportation services has delivered very good results. We don't have, or I haven't found as much information about women working in popular transportation, and how can that improves or create different conditions, no? And I was thinking that in this specific case, in the Clínica de Pavas, they have operators mainly, because that's the ones that we've been talking to. They have highlighted certain aspects. For example, women tend to look for women if they have the option in popular transportation, because they feel safer. They feel like they can ask them for specific things, that they don't feel as willing to ask for providers that they are men. Women, for example, these operators, they're talking, two of them said that as they are mothers, they know what mothers needs. So they have been introducing those changes into the operations that they provide. They have seats. They are more like empathic with the moms and with the kids, and they are fine with certain things that they might happen when you're talking about care mobility. This can be also a way of improving women's conditions in low-income communities, like creating a space for women to work in popular transportation contexts. And I do have two other things that I want to point out, is that we also have to acknowledge three things: that it's a male-centered, it's still a male-centered service. I mean, mostly men are the ones who provide the popular transportation. It's related to resource, no? I was thinking about how can we translate Lucy's work also to the popular transportation area? How can we bring some of those good practices, even though there's no regulation that it forces you to do these type of things, no? When it's informal organization like the one I'm talking about, they do this because they want to provide a good services, because that means more money, and that means also good relationships with the users that they already have to deal with, no? But I was thinking about also how can we acknowledge in the popular transportation sector that sexual harassment works both ways. No, it works towards the users, that there are these women that are using these services where they cannot go and just like, I mean, there's a process that is outside the transport, but as this is also a very stigmatized transportation, I don't know if that adds a layer of complexity to go to the police and say I was using an informal service and I was harassed in it, and how can that create more stigma? And I was also thinking about sexual harassments towards the operators, the women that are working as operators, and how can we create tools for them to be protected in this area? Because when we were talking to these operators, they were mentioning that they already experienced this challenge. And the way that they have been dealing with this is with their community of operators, that as most of them are women, they help each other to deal with this, no? But I was thinking it's very interesting to think about Lucy's toolkit and the work that they've been doing, how to replicate certain practices, gender perspective into the formal, into the popular or informal sector of the transportation. That was it.
Thanks so much, Carla. Does Lucy want to reply, or should we go to Fernanda first?
Yes, I can respond to that question or feedback generally. Actually, the toolkit, I've said in Africa, most of the cities and actually public transport is informal. So actually the tool is meant for informal public transport companies. It also informs government agencies that are focusing on transport. And just to highlight on how having women on board actually can enhance the experiences of women commuters. First of all, by having women there, we're having a woman voice. Number two, their voices are heard. Number three, they are able to lobby for safe working and commuter spaces because, again, we are talking about, I'm not saying women should be nurtures, but there is that where they are able to advocate for even the children. And of course, having the women on board again, it brings the component of them being visible and the industry being more responsive, the industry recognizing the needs of these women raising the need for them to be accommodated and for the industry to adjust and accommodate their respective needs. Again, if the women are not there, then the other gender will continue designing, coming up with solutions, coming up with innovation that only meets the needs exclusively for them. And it's so unfortunate when the industry is designed majorly by men for women, it cannot serve the purpose. It cannot address the specific needs that women have. So, and again, I want to talk about, we cannot exclude men from the conversation because, again, we are saying, like here in Kenya, about 90% of the industry is dominated by men. So we need to use them as entry point, use them as allies, to continue championing for gender inclusivity. And one of the things that we found quite useful, and again, it's within the toolkit, it's training them on gender mainstreaming, gender inclusivity. How best do they ensure that there's inclusivity within their companies? How best do they support women who are already working with them? How best can they recognize the specific needs of the women commuters, and further diving deeper into the diversity of these women with disabilities. Sexual harassment is more, it's very bad, especially for women. As, for example, for a woman on a wheelchair, when you are being lifted and nobody is asking you where do I hold you. They just pick you and just throw you inside the matatu, right? And you find some of these people who are trying to quote unquote help you, they are in a way sexually assaulting these women. So it exposes more women to being more vulnerable. And I think also working closely with men will help big time. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Fernanda.
I just wanted to add a more practical perspective that we applied in Mexico City. What Lucy was telling about the conditions of the vehicles, the physical characteristics, and how that is important for women's safety. In the case of mototaxis, they're illegal in Mexico City, so they cannot operate. Of course, they exist. We have like 11,000 mototaxis around the city. We started a diagnostic or a census of where they are, how many they were, and we put a sticker on each of its vehicles just to improve the safety. That was the only reason to have this census, to know where they were, who were operating, if they were part of an organization or if they were individuals. And with this sticker, in case of any report of harassment, any accident, or even a crime report that could happen, we knew the number, the vehicle, the location, the borough it was from, and the phone of the person that was in charge of that vehicle. So this helped us at least to make visible how many and have the numbers of how many vehicles there are. And there's still a process. I'm not longer in Mexico City's government, but their next steps should be how you use all this data or this information to start working on a regulatory framework that is inclusive of all these moto taxis. And the second good experience that when I was a general director of public transportation, we worked with some routes to have the first initiative of gender perspective in microbuses. So I was always super vocal about gender and how relevant it was, and Mexico City already had a strategy of gender perspective in the structured transport. So they established these protocols of how their operators could be the first respondents to know what they should do in case of harassment. Because most of the story they told us is like, yes, I fight the harasser. No, the girl reports me that someone is harassing them, I push him off the bus. No, or things that were not the protocols. So we work with most of them to understand what they should do, who they should call, and they implemented these gender routes just for women only routes in some of the peripheral zones. So I think that if you work along with the popular transport operator, you can still have these conditions of being aware of the gender perspective. It's hard to have more women yet because there are a lot of structural barriers that can relate it, our time burdens, also even toilets, no? Having bathrooms, infrastructure conditions in the bases or the hubs of the popular transport. So even though there are structural barriers, we need to be vocal about how we can increase the role of women inside the sector.
Thanks so much, Fernanda. Well, I think most of the discussion today actually took place in the chat, and I saw that people were very active over there. So I think I'm gonna hand it over to Jackie, unless anyone has any other pressing questions. Please let us know or type it in the chat, and we can continue the discussion for now. But I want to hand it over to Jackie because, as I mentioned before, she heads the Partnership for Research and Informal Mobility, informal and shared mobility, and she has a good perspective. She's been working in this topic for years. She's a popular transport rock star, and she has a lot of perspective of how this is evolving in different places around the world. So, Jackie, tell us what you're thinking, what you're seeing, and what we can, like your insights from this discussion. And afterwards, we'll tell you a little bit about the upcoming meet and greets that are going to happen this year. So you can write them down. And also, if you would like to talk in one of these meet and greets, if you have a project or initiative, some experience on this, we would also love to hear about you. But for now, Jackie.
Hey, thanks, Andrea. Well, first of all, I just want to thank all of these wonderful scholar activists for just incredible presentations that really give us a lot of hope that we can really address the scourge of these kinds of exclusions and these sorts of gender-based violence and all the the trauma and the just horrible aspects of these experiences for women. So I just think that what we see is actually, Andrea, a lot of progress in terms of very strong data collection and evidence and a lot of good ideas for how to move forward within the popular transport sector. And I think this speaks volumes to the importance of having women researchers engaged in these questions and having gender equity generally, in this work at all the different levels that have been discussed here. So basically, I first want to just really congratulate you all. And yet it shows us that there's still so much work to be done. There's still so many questions. And I know many of you have those questions. I would encourage you, like Andrea, to send us an email. We're happy to connect you to people. We're happy to have these conversations with you. There's so many questions about how to really get this implemented. I think we're seeing ways that we can mainstream really concrete actions into laws, into government, into working also more directly with these operators, and working also to support passengers who are experiencing this. And I think the whole idea of also collecting data and making sure women are also data collectors, and part of that is very, very important. I think there's still questions about how we can do that more systematically and how we can create feedback loops. So data reporting to government, data reporting back to operators, also more public pressure. And in that regard, I think it will be interesting for us to continue to have these conversations across different regions. I know these are also problems in Asia. I know, for example, our Indian colleagues also are seeing experiments around, like what Fernanda was saying, like you have gender-based routes, or also you have pink services run by women, for women, or women-only forms of transportation. There's a lot of discussion about whether that's the ideal, or, is that a temporary solution? I think it could be very interesting also to look at how do we start rating some of these services so that there's information that we know that maybe some operators have very bad records. Are there ways that we can do reporting and things like that that give passengers more information, and also government and civil society to address problems? So I think basically what we've seen today is a great step forward with this really, really terrific work. And I know that there are forums and networks specifically focused on women in transportation and also gender, these gender issues, which men should be very much part of, because, we are all people with all, we're a community, we're households, we're families. So this concerns us all. I don't know if any of you want to make a plug for any of those networks, or Andrea, you want to, follow up maybe with some ways that people can stay involved?
Sure, there's a global feminist alliance that reunites networks of women in transport in different places around the world. So if ever you are in need for a woman and a little bit more diversity in your teams, you can reach out to to the Global Feminist Alliance and to the regional networks to find that expertise. A lot of the times people say, "Oh no, there's no one," but it's because you usually go for the usual suspects, and those are usually the men in the sector because it's a very male-dominated scene. But I think, I think it is really important to find those networks. To me, from the German Cooperation Agency, there's a program specifically focused on inclusion and equity with a strong gender focus. United Nations, UNEP, is now that they're working on electrification. They have a big component and a working group looking at the gender dimensions of these electrification processes, because as I was mentioning before, usually the modernization conversations and the reform are all focusing on the vehicles, the routes, the businesses, the numbers, and we're kind of forgetting the human component. And so that's why the data gathering, the composition of the teams, the experts that we recruit, there has to be diversity there so that we can cater to a diversity of users as well, especially knowing and understanding that the main users of popular transport are women. So those are there. I don't know, Jackie, if you had any other elements to highlight.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. So one of the things we'll do is we'll make sure that this conversation is posted, and we'll circulate the post. We encourage you all to do the same. And we'll put in some of the notes, some of these fabulous networks and organizations that we would encourage you to connect with for all the wonderful reasons that Andrea talked about. And yeah, and Andrea, I think this, human-based focus is really what we keep struggling to get back to. And within that human-based focus, this whole ethics of care that is fundamental to all of us living well and building better communities. And so I think this research takes us much farther in that. And I really encourage everyone, whether you're a man or a woman, to really be part of this, because this is how we build better transportation systems and better communities. And I think the other thing that this shows is that we can't just look at these narrow transportation lenses and systems. We need to look within a broader, we sometimes call it an ecosystem approach, but also a broader community approach, because the solutions will come from many different actions, not just within, the sector. And throughout, we're highlighting that these services, are also surprising. They provide tailored services, as we heard, for women to protect their security. So, we need to think about these operators and these services as allies in these bigger struggles. And I think that's an ongoing theme of the Global Network for Popular Transport that Andrea's a rock star at the center of, and also our partnership for research on informal shared mobility. And so we're inviting you all to continue this incredibly rich and important conversation.
Thanks so much, Jackie. So we're about to close. Thanks to Lucy, to Fernanda, to Carla for joining us today, and thanks all of you as well. Since we are very curious to learn more about all the different dimensions of popular transport and what's going on around the world, we will have these meet and greets every other month. Christian will share a screen in a second to show you what other topics we're going to be talking about. We did a survey last year to ask people what they were interested in. We're also looking at what people are talking about, what is the new research coming up. So January was user needs and motivations. It ended up being a very gender-focused conversation because those are the majority of users of popular transport. And I think that's great to kind of focus on that. We're going to talk in March about regulatory frameworks, because that's usually what the kind of like the starting step of conversations, especially with authorities. So we're going to bring in people who are working on their regulations. We are doing a global scan, for example, on motorcycle taxis regulations. So we'll come and say, okay, what's out there, what works, what hasn't, what are the difficulties in regulating, how have different countries or cities done this regulatory process. And so we'll have some experiences on that. We're going to be talking about climate and popular transport in May. We're going to be talking about how to reduce emissions through nationally determined contributions, how countries can develop climate goals for the sector to reduce emissions, very much tied to electrification, but there's many other ways to make pop transport cleaner. In July, we're going to be talking about minibus electrification specifically. We've been talking a lot about 2 and 3 wheelers last year, and that's the sector that is electrifying the most fastly in popular transport. But minibuses are lagging a little bit behind, and they have specific difficulties that we're opening a space to talk about, and what we're learning from different experiences around the world. We're going to be talking about data as well. Data is one of the biggest conversations in pop transport, because since it's usually a sector that is outside of regulatory frameworks, then there's hardly any data on the sector. So who is collecting it? Are we disaggregating this data by gender so that we know what the experiences and needs are? How are operators or governments using these data? How can we use data to plan better, etc.? How do we monitor and also assess the impact of certain measures or measures or policies that are implemented? And finally, we're going to be talking about integration between popular transport and formal transport. There has been sometimes a notion or assumption that it's an either or conversation. We either have completely formal systems or everything is informal or popular. But what we advocate for is a good integration so that we are able to maintain connectivity, accessibility, and complementarity between these systems. As we were saying, in Mexico City, where there's a lot of different options, in Pavas as well, the popular transport sector is part of this ecosystem, and how can we integrate these different services better, thinking about the users and their need for flexible, connected, and intermodal service networks. So we're going to have a very interesting year with a lot of different conversations, a lot of learning. If you have something to share about these topics, please let us know, and we can try to incorporate you into the agenda, or if you have someone to recommend as well, let us know. We already have some leads for these different conversations, but we're always open to hear about new leaderships and new faces in the community, and to widen this network of learning that we have. So thank you so much for your attention today. I think it was a wonderful conversation where we learned a lot. And I think there's still a lot to learn and exchange throughout the year, and we will see each other in a couple of months then to discuss. Hope you have a good day, night, or afternoon, depending on where you are, and we'll see each other soon. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.